This is part 4 of chapter 2. So continuing on from the previous video, we just want to discuss a couple of the different Federalist Papers. So these are both in the back of your textbook if you're interested to check them out. So one, this Federalist number 10, talks about or justifies this concept of pluralism or pluralist theory. So all that is the idea that every group in the country should have a voice in the system. Everybody should have a voice in what's going on, and that way it prevents any one dominant group from totally running the show, from totally dominating what's going on in the country. So if you remember from class, we used the example of gun control, where, for example, there's the extremes of people that want no guns in society, or people that don't want the government to have anything to do with you having a gun. And then of course there's a lot of people sort of in the middle there. So the idea is, not just one group is dominating the gun control debate. There's a lot of different folks involved in that. So kind of, again, the idea everybody has a voice in our country. So the number 51, so if you think about this idea that this new Constitution is going to replace the Articles of Confederation, obviously some people would be pretty worried about that. So the 51 talks about how the Constitution would actually prevent government from abusing its citizens. And we'll see as well, like particularly in the Bill of Rights, why that plays an important role. So continuing on, we're just looking at, so you can see the march to the finish, sort of they've written this Constitution in the summertime of 1787, over a couple months there. So then we're kind of looking at, the few months into actually trying to make it the law of the land. So I'll show you the whole list in a second. So you can see there are a couple states that are important. So New York, for example, even though it was a close vote, that it put the Constitution over the top, meaning that after New York voted yes, there was enough states to make the Constitution good to go. It became the new form of government for our country. So then we'll look at on the next slide, the North Carolina and Rhode Island actually joined afterwards. So here's the list. So again, like we've talked about before, remember this term ratification, or to ratify something, means to give formal consent or formal approval, basically making something official. So for example, a Constitution was just a piece of paper that they were writing over the summer. So then ratification means that, okay, this is actually going to be the supreme law of the land. Okay, so this is the list of the, so you can see these are the colonies that then switch over to becoming states in the United States. So of course we call Delaware our first state because they were the first state to ratify the Constitution back on December 7th, 1787. So you can see overwhelmingly for a lot of these, including Delaware, 30-0, 38, 26. So the voting would have taken place in the state capitals at that time, in the Capitol building. So this would have been the state legislatures, right? So say for example, North Carolina, of course, be the capital, in Pennsylvania, and so forth. Okay. All right, so you can see, so they write the Constitution in the summer of 1787. Then by the winter time, they're already voting on it. You can see this happened mostly over the course of 1788. All right, so I think we looked at another slide in class. So I just wanted you to see, just how like the different times at which different states became into the United States, right? So this other slide should give you a good example of that. So you can see, for example, right there's Delaware 1787, North Carolina 1789. But look, so again, our country started out, it was mainly this group of states up and down the East Coast, and then we gradually expanded westward as the country grew. So look, some of these states much more recent, right? 1912 for New Mexico and Arizona down here. Again, even much more recent, right? 1959 for Alaska and Hawaii. So it wasn't really that long ago that we only had 48 states. So again, kind of shows you that our country looks a whole lot different now than when those guys were writing the Constitution. All right. So the one last piece we want to discuss on this slide. So you can see there's this asterisk next to North Carolina here. So down here it says ratification originally defeated in August 1788 by a vote of 84 to 184, but then they come back in November 1789 and then they vote yes. So we're like, well, what changed in the meantime? What changed from the no vote to the yes vote? So we see Bill of Rights is added to the Constitution. then North Carolina votes to ratify or to give formal approval, right? So North Carolina says once that's included, then we'll get on board. All right, so we've talked about this major distinction of what people wanted on different sides as far as what the new government would look like. The Federalists, of course, were more encouraged or more desired a stronger national government or federal government. So that's the easy way to remember it. You know, Federalists has the word federal right in it. So then, of course, the Anti-Federalists wanted power to stay more at the state level. Again, looking back at this, so the Federalists end up winning out, of course, and the new Constitution is adopted. All right, so overall, you know, there was a sense in the country that support was probably pretty widespread. Most people realized there was some issues with the Articles of Confederation. So most, you know, that it was weak and wasn't good enough for the country. So that, you know, most people wanted to try something new with the Constitution. All right. So then switching gears, we're going to look at the Bill of Rights. So remember, this is sort of the first part that's added to the Constitution, also known as the first 10 amendments. So a good way to think about these is a bill of limits. So thinking about particularly, say, something like the First Amendment that has all that stuff in there, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all those type of things, basically says, you know, how the government is limited towards its citizens. So I think we talked about in class, say, for example, even today during a court case, someone might say, I plead the Fifth. Of course, that's referring to the Fifth Amendment, which is the right to not self-incriminate. You don't have to speak on the stand if you don't want to. So initially, the Bill of Rights just applied to national governments, not state governments. So that doesn't change until right after the Civil War. So then the last sort of major piece of this chapter we're going to look at is how you change the Constitution. So we call this a formal amendment process. So to amend just means to change or update. So give those guys some credit from back in the day, right? They realized the country would have new problems, things that they were unforeseen, you know, new challenges the country would face that they would have no idea about. So they did want to include a mechanism that they could change the Constitution. But on the other hand, they said this has to be taken on with extreme caution. You better be very serious about what you're doing, and very rigorous or challenging process, very difficult process to get that done. So the reason they did that was because they, you know, trying to avoid sort of a like temporary passions, avoiding sort of a flavor of the week kind of thing, you know, where the American people wanted to change the Constitution today, then change it to something else 6 months down the road, and then something else, you know, a year after that. So this would be really serious stuff. So we also talked about, remember, an amendment is different than just a plain old law, because an amendment changes the actual founding document of our country, the Constitution of the United States. Whereas the law can be changed very easily, right? So something like Obamacare, known as the Affordable Care Act, right? Congress could change that very quickly if it wanted to, whereas an amendment is much different. All right, so again, it's not like people haven't tried. So you can see over 5,000 have been introduced, but we'll see in a second here that only 27 have been ratified, been formally approved since that time. And if you think about that, it even seems less, where if the first 10 are the Bill of Rights that came in shortly after the Constitution, then really we just have 17, you know, since those very early years. All right, so there's a lot of stuff on this slide, but again, the main one I want you to focus on is this top left to top right process we call the traditional method. And why I say it's the most important, so we just saw that there's 27 amendments, 26 of them have been done through this method, a traditional method, right? You can see just the one time they did this other one for the 21st. Of course, that repealed prohibition, repealed the 18th Amendment. So we looked in class that you could see you need both levels of government. So first it has to go through 2/3 of Congress, or about 67%. So right there, that's extremely difficult. To get both houses and that high of a percentage to agree is extraordinarily challenging just by itself. Then it's got to go to the states. And the state, so in 3/4 of the states, or 3/4 of the state legislatures, they have to ratify it. So think about that today. So 3/4 of the states if we have 50 states, that would mean that you would need 38 out of the 50. Again, and that's after the Congress, after 2/3 of Congress has voted yes to ratify it. All right. So again, you would need 38 out of the 50 to get on board. Even if you just got 37, that wouldn't be enough. So we looked in class, I think, at the this Equal Rights Amendment. This Equal Rights Amendment. So I wanted to show you the ERA, or the Equal Rights Amendment. So you can see it got almost there. So this was supposed to be an amendment to try to guarantee equal rights based on, or that rights could not be abridged based on sex, basically making sure women had equal rights in the country. So you can see, even though Congress did ratify it, right, it fell 3 states short, so only 35 out of the 38. So this one was extremely close, but didn't end up making it to an amendment. All right. So returning to our PowerPoint slide. So again, this is the main. So think about both houses of Congress, 3/4 of the states. All right. So if there's some major theme that goes through the amendments, you can see one would be this expansion of citizenship rights. So for example, women getting the right to vote in 1920, getting more rights for more people. So that's one of those. So citizenship rights. So you can see, right, we call these the post-Civil War amendments. So for example, you can see slavery ends with the 13th. 14th gives citizenship to everyone born in the country, right, 3 years later. Then the 15th Amendment gives African American males the right to vote, right, 1870. So think about that. All men in the country had the right to vote. Well, 50 years before any woman, right? Women's right to vote not until the 19th Amendment in 1920. All right. So we have those, and then the last one about citizenship rights would be setting the voting age to 18. So remember, we talked about this is a direct reflection of the Vietnam War going on in the country in the early 70s. So of course people said, well, if I can join the military and fight and die in a foreign country, I should definitely have the right to vote in my own country. So we looked at the expansion of citizenship rights. So then the second major theme would just be a lot of sort of administrative things. So something like direct election of U.S. senators. Nowadays, of course, we vote for all these people. That's from the 17th Amendment. Or we'll talk about in our presidential chapter that the president can just serve 2 terms. So 22nd Amendment. Those kind of things, right? So, or the D.C. does have a say in the electoral college. There is an electoral votes for Washington D.C. All right, so those are kind of the 2 main themes that you can see running through there. So speaking of changing the Constitution, we also want to look at some informal methods. So you can see all the different branches here, right? So legislative, executive, and judicial. So not everything that we do in our country needs to rise all the way to an amendment. Congress can, of course, pass different laws. The president can take certain actions just by himself. And then finally, the courts can also be involved in these matters. So the last piece we want to look at is how people view the Constitution. So we have 2 major distinctions here, loose and strict constructions. So the strict is much more, again, limiting the government to only what it says right in the Constitution, what's explicitly stated. So, what's kind of right in there, black and white on the page, no real sort of creativity or flexibility related to that. Whereas on the other hand, loose construction is more broad, open-ended, flexible. Another way people refer to the loose construction is a living document, sort of the idea that each generation should read it through their own eyes. So the example I gave you in class was again thinking about gun control, that people would say, well, yeah, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, that's great and all, right? The loose construction would say that's all you need to know. It says it right there in the Second Amendment. Whereas the loose construction would say, well, yeah, but that's from 1791. The times have changed, technology has advanced, we have all these assault rifles and that type of thing. So you need to have a much more of a flexible or loose interpretation of the Constitution. So then our last slide, so again, I just wanted you guys to see, right? So the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence are all in this room in the National Archives.